After being excluded from our family gatherings for 12 long years, they finally showed up at my new apartment. As soon as they walked in, their faces turned white. What I said next, my carefully planned revenge, left them stunned. I, 34M, had been waiting for this moment for 12 years. 12 years of being the family outcast, the black sheep who wasn't worthy of Christmas dinners, birthday celebrations, or even casual weekend barbecues. Today, they were finally going to see what their rejection had cost them. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m., just as I expected. Through the security camera, I watched my parents, my older brother, and his wife standing awkwardly on my doorstep. They looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot like children who'd been forced to apologize for breaking something valuable. My mother clutched her purse tighter than usual, and my father kept adjusting his collar. My brother whispered something to his wife, probably reassuring her that this wouldn't take long. I let them wait for a full minute before opening the door. The satisfaction of watching them squirm through the camera was too delicious to cut short. When I finally opened the door, their expressions were exactly what I'd hoped for, forced smiles masking obvious discomfort. My mother immediately started talking about how lovely my building looked and how she'd always wondered about this neighborhood. My father nodded along, making small talk about the weather and traffic. My brother and his wife stood slightly behind them, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. I invited them in with the same fake warmth they'd shown me at family events I'd crashed uninvited over the years. The few times I'd tried to reconnect, they'd made it clear I wasn't welcome. Always polite, always civil, but the message was unmistakable. I didn't belong. As they stepped into my foyer, I watched their faces carefully. The initial politeness began to crack as they took in their surroundings. My mother's eyes widened as she noticed the marble floors and crystal chandelier. My father stopped mid-sentence about the parking situation outside. My brother's jaw literally dropped as he stared at the sweeping staircase with its hand-carved banister. I led them into the main living room, savoring every second of their growing bewilderment. The space was enormous, probably larger than my parents' entire house. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and the furniture was the kind you see in architectural magazines. Everything was pristine, expensive, and deliberately impressive. My mother asked if I was house-sitting for someone, her voice carrying a nervous laugh. I told her no, this was my home. The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat and asked how I could afford a place like this. His tone suggested he thought I'd won the lottery or inherited money from some distant relative they didn't know about. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to reconcile the son they'd written off as a failure with the obvious wealth surrounding them. I offered them drinks and watched as they settled uncomfortably on my Italian leather sofa. They looked like they were afraid to touch anything, as if their presence might somehow damage the pristine environment. My brother kept looking around with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, something between awe and confusion. While I prepared coffee in my gourmet kitchen, I could hear them whispering in the living room. They were trying to make sense of what they were seeing, probably wondering if I'd gotten involved in something illegal or if this was all some elaborate facade. The idea that their family disappointment could have legitimately achieved this level of success clearly hadn't occurred to them. I returned with coffee served on bone china, the kind my mother had always coveted but could never afford. She handled the cup like it might shatter at her touch, commenting on how beautiful the pattern was. I thanked her and mentioned casually that it was part of a set I'd picked up at an auction in London last month. The conversation that followed was surreal. They asked about my work, and I explained that I'd built a successful consulting firm from the ground up. When my father asked what kind of consulting, I told him about the Fortune 500 companies I advised on digital transformation strategies. The technical details went over their heads, but the prestige of the client names clearly registered. My brother, who had always been the golden child, the one with the stable job and perfect family, asked how long I'd been doing this. When I told him I'd started the company 8 years ago, I watched him do the math in his head. 8 years ago was when they'd made it crystal clear that I wasn't welcome at his wedding. The timing wasn't lost on any of us. My mother tried to steer the conversation toward family news, updating me on relatives I hadn't seen in years. She talked about my cousin's new baby, my aunt's retirement, and various family milestones I'd missed. Each update was a reminder of all the celebrations I'd been excluded from, all the memories I'd been denied the chance to make. I listened politely, nodding at appropriate moments, but I could see the growing discomfort in their eyes. They were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake, the success they'd dismissed, the relationship they'd thrown away. My father asked why I'd never mentioned my success before, why I'd let them think I was struggling. I reminded him that I'd tried to stay in touch over the years, but my calls went unreturned and my invitations were declined. I'd stopped sharing my life with them because they'd made it clear they weren't interested. The room fell silent again. My brother's wife, who had barely spoken since arriving, finally asked why I'd invited them over today. It was a fair question, and one I'd been preparing to answer for months. I told them about the family reunion my cousin had mentioned on social media, the big gathering planned for next month that I'd once again not been invited to. I'd seen the photos from previous years, the happy family moments I'd been systematically excluded from. This time, instead of feeling hurt or angry, I'd felt something else entirely: pity. I explained that I'd realized something important recently. For 12 years, I'd been devastated by their rejection, thinking there was something wrong with me, something that made me unworthy of their love and acceptance. But sitting in my beautiful home, surrounded by the success I'd built despite their abandonment, I finally understood the truth. The problem had never been with me. The problem was with them. I told them about the business I'd built, the employees who depended on me, the clients who valued my expertise. I talked about the charity work I'd become involved in, the mentorship programs I'd started for young entrepreneurs from difficult backgrounds. I described the life I'd created, rich, meaningful, and fulfilling, without any of them in it. My mother started to cry, and my father looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. My brother stared at his hands, probably thinking about all the times he'd sided with our parents in keeping me at arm's length. But I wasn't finished. I told them about the penthouse I was closing on next week, 3 floors of luxury in the most exclusive building in the city. I mentioned the vacation home I'd just purchased in the mountains, the one with enough bedrooms to host large family gatherings if I'd had a family worth gathering with. I explained that I'd invited them here today not because I wanted them back in my life, but because I wanted them to see what they'd lost. For 12 years, they'd treated me like I was nothing, like I had nothing to offer, like I wasn't worth their time or attention. Today, I wanted them to understand exactly how wrong they'd been. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. My mother finally spoke, her voice shaky, asking if there was any way to fix this, any way to rebuild what had been broken. My father nodded eagerly, suddenly interested in having a relationship with the son he'd written off. I looked at each of them carefully, these people who shared my DNA but had never really been my family. I thought about all the birthdays they'd missed, all the achievements they'd ignored, all the times I'd needed support and found only closed doors. I told them that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. Some relationships, once poisoned, couldn't be healed. They'd made their choice 12 years ago, and I'd made mine today. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd conquered while they'd been busy pretending I didn't exist. I told them that I'd built a good life without them, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide or how I might reflect on them. My brother finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper, asking if I really meant to cut them out forever. He reminded me that we were family, that blood was supposed to mean something. I turned back to face them, these strangers who happened to share my last name. I told him that family was supposed to mean something, but they'd forgotten that lesson long before I had. Family was supposed to be about support, acceptance, and unconditional love. What they'd shown me was conditional tolerance at best, and complete rejection at worst. I explained that I'd spent years trying to earn their approval, trying to prove I was worthy of their love. But I'd finally learned that I didn't need their validation to be successful, happy, or fulfilled. I'd found my worth in my own achievements, my own relationships, my own life. The visit ended with awkward goodbyes and promises to stay in touch that we all knew were empty. They left my apartment looking smaller somehow, diminished by the reality of what they'd thrown away. Update 1. 3 weeks later, my cousin called to tell me about the family reunion. Apparently, my parents had spent the entire event talking about my success, showing pictures of my apartment on their phones, and telling anyone who would listen about their son, the successful businessman. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that I had something they could brag about, suddenly I was worth acknowledging. My brother had apparently asked multiple family members for my phone number, claiming he wanted to reconnect. Several relatives reached out to me directly, suddenly interested in the family member they'd ignored for over a decade. The sudden attention felt hollow and opportunistic. I didn't respond to any of their attempts at contact. I'd said what I needed to say, and I'd meant every word. Update 2. 6 months after their visit, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. My cousin, the same one who'd been posting about family gatherings I wasn't invited to, was getting married and wanted me there. The invitation was expensive, formal, and included a handwritten note about how much it would mean to have the whole family together. I RSVP'd that I wouldn't be attending and sent an expensive gift from their registry with a polite note wishing them well. I'd learned that my presence at family events was no longer about genuine connection. It was about what my success could add to their social media posts and dinner party conversations. Update 3. A year later, I was featured in a business magazine as one of the city's most successful young entrepreneurs. The article included photos of my penthouse and details about my company's rapid growth. Within hours of the magazine hitting newsstands, my phone was buzzing with messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years. My mother left a voicemail saying how proud she was and how she'd always known I'd be successful. My father sent a text asking if I needed any help managing my investments. My brother called 3 times, leaving increasingly desperate messages about wanting to catch up and rebuild our relationship. I deleted all the messages without responding. Their sudden interest in my life felt like vindication of every choice I'd made. They'd proven, beyond any doubt, that their love was conditional on my success, their acceptance dependent on what I could offer them. I'd built a life I was proud of, surrounded by people who'd chosen to be there during the difficult years, not just the successful ones. My real family, the friends who'd become my chosen family, the mentors who'd believed in me, the colleagues who'd supported my vision, had been with me through everything. The people who'd abandoned me when I needed them most would never again have the privilege of sharing in my success. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way forever. Looking back, that afternoon in my apartment had been exactly what I'd hoped it would be. Not just revenge, but closure. I'd shown them what they'd lost, and more importantly, I'd proven to myself that I'd never needed them at all. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't just success. It was the peace that came with finally letting go of people who'd never deserved a place in your life to begin with.